Good morning, guys. Welcome to my unboxing and review of the high-grade Leo flight unit type. This is a 2019 premium Bandai exclusive release that I got for $19 based on 2018's high-grade Leo. Now, this kit is about $4 to $5 more expensive than you can find the Leo in most hobby stores in the US, and I think that's for good reason because it does come with that rather large flight unit on the back there as well as an updated arsenal including several new weapons. The original Leo is as cheap as it is largely because of how kind of bare bones it is. It really only comes with sword, board, beam rifle, the typical loadout. This also comes with, I believe, an added bazooka and the Dober gun that the Tallgeese uses in addition to, of course, the flight unit. So this review might seem kind of random or out of nowhere, but this is for good reason. As I probably mentioned in my previous video on the Master Grade Double Zeta Gundam Verka, I am taking a look at this mostly because I am going to be getting the 3-wing side story special Leos coming. I think a couple of days before you see this video they should show up, and I'm planning to take a look at it the week after this video comes out. I'm going to be first taking a look at the large Leo N, and then the S, and then the R at some point in the future. I'm not the biggest fan of the R's design, I just picked it up for completion's sake for having all of the side story wing Leos, but I'm building this kit as the kind of baseline unit to compare them to. I do find this unit a lot more interesting than the standard Leo, so I decided to use this instead of that, because they are essentially the same in terms of the base body, except this has the flight pack on the back and some extra thrusters on the legs. Apart from that, it is mostly identical to the standard Leo. So let's go right into it. In typical P-Bandai fashion, the front box art here is going to show a CG render of a squad of Leo flight types flying there, showing off its unique weapons. Well, showing off one of its unique weapons. You see the bazooka there in the back. It's very blurry, but it is there. Of course, you have your standard Leo 105mm rifle, and I think that might be the Dober gun on the right, but that is very blurry. Actually, I see the drum, so I think that's just another 105mm rifle. But of course, in very typical P-Bandai fashion, there's pretty much nothing on the sides of the box, just going to be in this monochrome lavender. It's like a bluish purple color that is going to be the main armor tone of the Leo flight unit. I think the two different variants of Leos that were P-Bandai, the flight unit type and the space type. The space type was purple. This is slightly bluer, so I'm not exactly sure what color to call it, periwinkle maybe, but inside the box we will get 4 bags of runners, which is pretty basic, but again, this is a very basic grunt unit. The high-grade Leo kicked off the series of, I guess, army builders, or I forget exactly what Bandai was calling it, the fine touch build system or whatever. Basically, these very simple grunt kits that you can build up fairly quickly and do look quite nice for how simple they are. The Leo was the first one in that series, followed by the Maganak, then the Death Army, and then the Wyndham, which is the only other one in this series that I've built. I haven't built any of the other ones because I don't find the designs all that interesting. I might build the Maganak at some point. Anyway, coming back to the Leo here, of course you will be getting this P-Bandai style manual here, all in black and white. No art or anything, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. Of course, you're going to get your parts list here. Again, it looks quite simple. You're essentially going to have 3 full-size runners for parts for the actual mobile suit. You have a runner for the weapons, and then some extra auxiliary runners here, beam saber effects, and some polycaps. All of the usual stuff. And getting right into the build, as you can see, this is incredibly simple with the torso only consisting of 4 steps, but I do think that the Leo's design is simple enough that this should be fairly competent in its build, and despite how simple it is, should give a fairly nice looking final product. Of course, you get your rather simple head here. I have heard that despite how simple and cheap the Leo is, it doesn't actually include any color correcting stickers, and none are necessary to make it mostly color accurate. I don't know if it's entirely color accurate. Of course, I will take a look at that after the build. Then of course you get into your arms. Again, incredibly simple stuff here. And then you get into your legs. Yeah, this looks like it's going to be a fairly quick, simple build, but I don't think anyone's really expecting it to be more. Of course, talking about snipping the skirts apart to give individual articulation, assembling the full Leo there, and then you get into the rather large flight pack here. I am a little bit concerned with the color accuracy of the flight pack because that is usually where, in a lot of these kits with over-the-top backpacks, the color accuracy tends to go out the window, is in the large flight accessories or backpacks or whatever. And talking about mounting the booster units onto the thighs, and then you get into your arsenal here, consisting of a bazooka, 105mm machine gun, the Dober gun, beam sabers, shield, and these 2 additional shoulder cannons that you can mount onto your flight unit if you want a more heavily armed unit. So of course these weapons are going to be in very typical high-grade fashion, mostly consisting of 2 F sandwich chained together. For the Leo 105mm rifle, the rather thick cylindrical drum magazine is going to be a separate part. Talking about wielding the 105mm rifle two-handed, of course you get the Dober gun, the same weapon used by the Tallgeese that you can mount onto the Leo's shoulder there. The shield very similar to the one the Tallgeese uses, and then of course the large shoulder cannons that you can mount onto your Leo. So overall this looks like it's going to be a very simple build, but it should be competent enough for what is in the box. So inside the bags we will get. Inside the bags we will be getting 11 runners, which does sound like a lot for how simple this unit is, but then again, many of these runners are fairly small. We get 2 runners for polycaps, 1 for the beam saber effect parts, so it doesn't really amount to all that many parts, so this should be a fairly quick, simple build. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, there is no color correcting sticker sheet, so hopefully that means this thing is going to be at least mostly color accurate. So getting into the runners themselves. So these runners were printed in January of 2025, starting with 2 of runner PC7 here for a set of polycap ball joints for use all across the kit. Again, with how simple this kit is, I don't really suspect that these will be any kind of issue, but we will see once the build is complete. Runner A here in this bluish purple, going to be from the original Leo, containing many of the armor parts seen across this kit for things like the legs, arms, torso, head, etc. You also see a large part for the shield up here. Runner B here in this very dark navy blue, going to contain parts for our joints, hands, and some parts for things like the feet. Runner C going to be a multicolored runner coming in 4 different colors. We get a light primer gray here for parts for things like the base part of the torso, some frame parts, the drum for the 105mm rifle, parts for the feet, some I think like thruster or bolt details here. I'm pretty sure these are thruster details, etc. We get black here for the inner frame part for the waist. We get a joint part down here, also presumably for the legs or something. We get some auxiliary parts here, and then of course we get the main body of the 105mm rifle. We get clear orange here for the single, like, I guess, big, not quite mono eye, just like the very large camera lens on the head of the Leo, giving it a very iconic look. And then we get a very dark purple up here for accent parts for around the Leo's head, and an auxiliary part here, which looks like a scope or lens of some kind. All right, skipping a few letters to runner F2, which is new for the Leo flight type here, which is going to include some auxiliary thruster parts for the leg units, some extra brackets and things to mount the weapons, I believe. You will get the 2 halves to make the Dober gun over here, and the 2 halves to make the bazooka up here. Runner G2, still unique to the flight unit type, going to be coming in this bluish purple color, same as on runner A, going to contain parts for the wings for the flight unit, the big parts that are going to layer over the shoulders where the cannons are going to mount, etc. Runner G3 going to contain a duplicate of 2 parts in that same bluish purple color from runner G2. 2 of runner G4 in a darker purple color, going to contain parts for, I think these are fuel or propellant tanks that are going to go on the flight unit, the tips of the wings for the flight unit, and the tops of the thrusters on the legs. And of course, last but certainly not least, we get runner SB6 here for our beam saber effect parts for a pair of short style beam saber effect parts in clear pink. So all in all, not all that many parts. It should be a fairly simple build that I do think will end up looking quite nice at the end of the day. It is an army builder kit, so it should be simple yet effective. So I will see you after that build. All right, welcome back. Here's the high-grade Leo flight type snap built-in panel lined, and this was, as expected, a very simple and quick build. I think very similar to the Leo, you could definitely bang this out in an afternoon, and even with all the extra stuff the flight type comes with, you could definitely complete this within a couple hours. At least cut out, clean up, and assemble. Panel lining itself might take you another half hour to hour, but this is still a very quick build that you can fit into pretty much any day if you have a couple spare hours. But getting right into the build, like I just said, this build is exceedingly simple, but you really can see the DNA of the, I don't remember exactly what Bandai calls it, but their very simple build system for army builders and mass-producing grunts and things like that they started with the Leo, because the only other one in that series that I've built is the Wyndham, and they use identical joints for the knees and elbows. You can very clearly see the evolution there. Now for the build of the Leo flight type itself, again, exceedingly simple. Parts the head are 5 or 6 parts maybe. The torso, not counting the parts for the shoulder joints, was 4 parts maybe. It was incredibly quick and easy to build, and I'm actually very surprised at what part separation there was, given how little the parts count is. With things like the feet being made of multiple different parts, and even having a little bit of armor layering and things like that, that really helped this model feel a lot more high quality than its price tag would indicate, and really helps it punch above its weight class. So despite being extremely simple, it is still a quite enjoyable build. However, I do have my issues with the build, especially with like things like looseness. I don't know if it's exactly a fit issue, but there are multiple points in this kit that do feel quite loose to actually like manipulate around. Not to the point where they feel floppy, but to the point where it's very easy to accidentally articulate them. Now, a couple of these have to do with the polycaps and one of them does not. So the torso is split up into 3 sections, with the middle section having polycaps on the top and bottom to allow for more organic articulation of both the like chest area and the lower torso. That is unfortunately incredibly loose, and it is very easy to accidentally tilt the torso or pop the bottom out or things like that because it's fairly loose on there. The other polycap part that's going to be quite loose is going to be the top of the leg going into the waist. I don't know exactly why, but it seems like the fit for the actual polycap ball joint going into the leg is quite loose, so it does tend to shift around incredibly easily. It doesn't feel the most stable, which is a little bit of an issue considering the very heavy backpack. In addition, the part of the kit that is not polycap related that does feel very loose is going to be in the ankle armor, where there is a joint going from the leg into the feet that has a little ball at the end that the ankle armor will like slot onto. Now normally this wouldn't be that big of a deal because we've seen this kind of armor many times before. Normally it's actually the ankle armor that has a ball joint that fits into the socket, but here it's in reverse, and the problem is with the way it slots into the ankle armor, there isn't a socket in the ankle armor. There's just a little bit of a like gap that it slides into, and it's not very tight. So the ankle armor is incredibly loose. It's very easy to knock askew or knock off of the ball. So while the actual like construction of the leg and foot, it sits there fairly stably. As you're constructing it, before you put the foot on, the ankle armor just keeps falling off. It's incredibly annoying to deal with. But apart from those annoyances, the build is, I would say, competent. It's incredibly simple, so I didn't find it that enjoyable, at least not in the way that something like the Double Zeta was that I took a look at last video. This is very much like in the opposite direction of that. While the Double Zeta was so like wonderfully complex and engrossing in its build, this coming immediately off of that is exceptionally simple. Again, I don't exactly know how to describe it because normally I like to go a bit in detail with these kinds of builds, but there's not really much to do here. It's just everything is like 2 halves sandwiched together, tons of hollow spaces across this kit, a couple of small joints linking everything, but apart from that, yeah, you can really get this done in a couple of hours. The extra parts added with the flight unit itself, and the few extra weapons are also incredibly simple. You can build all of them in under 10 minutes. Like everything on display can get done incredibly quickly. So yeah, that's exactly how I would describe the build. Simple, quick, adequate. So getting into aesthetics then with the Leo flight type here. So the way you assemble the Leo, first you build up just the base Leo, and then you build all of the flight parts and attach the flight pack and the boosters on the legs. Without doing those additional parts, you essentially have just I think the Southeast Asian Forces Leo, the one that's like this shade of blue-purple accents. This is very close to that color scheme, so if you don't attach the flight unit, and if you just have the plain legs instead of the ones with the boosters, you pretty much just have that kind of Leo. But of course I will talk about color accuracy before I get into my opinions on this design, and there are no color correcting stickers if you remember from the unboxing section, which sounds good, but unfortunately the kit is not perfectly color accurate, so that lack of color correcting stickers wasn't exactly the greatest indicator of the color accuracy of this kit. So this kit is lightly painted, and I will go over the color inaccuracies now. First, the one thing that isn't color inaccurate but I painted anyway is of course going to be behind the visor. I painted it with a EX plated silver Gundam marker to give it a little bit of extra shine and reflectiveness, and I think that little bit of texture from the paint being a little uneven does make the mono eye sensor pop a little bit more, make it feel a little bit more interesting with a little bit of extra texture. Apart from that, in terms of color inaccurate parts on this kit, there are going to be multiple points in this kit in the frame in this light gray color where there are going to be these bars here. The center part needs to be shaded in black, so there's going to be one here in the torso. There's going to be one here on the back of the shield. It was actually kind of hard to see on all of the promo material whether or not this is supposed to be painted in a dark gray. I just used black because I think it helps contrast more, but I did paint the middle part of the inside of the shield in black. And on the Leo 105mm rifle, the secondary handle here, this bar that comes up around the drum magazine, the center also needs to be in a dark gray. Again, I just used black. In the cannon shoulders then, the barrels are supposed to be in black. I used shine silver because I thought it would pop more for the barrels, and I do really like how it turned out. So yeah, I would recommend you do paint these barrels in silver. If you want to be color accurate, you just use dark gray, same as the bars that I was talking about earlier. Oh, one other part I forgot to mention on the Leo rifle, on the front here for this scope, I think the center part here in the front needs to be in dark gray. Again, I just use black for better contrast. In the flight unit itself, the thruster parts for the glider pack here, or the exhaust or whatever, needs to be in black. There's also an intake on the front, but it's very hard to see when it's actually mounted on the Leo. You can kind of see it under the armpits there, but the intake and the exhaust here all needs to be in black. So again, I just used the ultra-fine tip black Gundam marker to do that. And then on the bazooka here, there is a scope that is, I think it's supposed to be in the same shade of blue as the Leo itself. I thought it would make a nicer accent color to use high new purple, so I just did that. If you want to be color accurate, again, you should use the same shade of blue that the Leo is in here. So yeah, there are plenty of small color inaccuracies across this kit. I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world if you don't paint the dark gray accents on the bars. Really, the only things you should concern yourself with are, of course, going to be the barrels on the cannon shoulders, because I think in the same shade of blue as the Leo itself, it looks pretty unnatural. The scope of the bazooka should also be painted in, and the intake and exhaust of the flight pack should also be in black to really sell the fact that it is, well, a flight pack. It should be hollow in there. Apart from that, I think you can get away with not really painting this kit all that much so. This kit has several color inaccuracies, but I think that was to be expected with how simple of a high grade this is. I think some color inaccuracy is to be expected with a kit, or at least a base kit this cheap, because again, the vast majority of this is essentially identical. It's a color swap to the standard release Leo that's like $13 or something, which is exceptionally cheap for Gunpla in the States. So yeah, I think some color inaccuracy was to be expected here. In terms of my opinions on this design, I do actually like the Leo quite a bit, which is odd because I don't exactly enjoy the design of the Zaku all that much, and the Leo is very clearly supposed to be like an expy for the Zaku in the After Colony universe. And the Leo I do find to be quite interesting, maybe because it is mostly just the Tallgeese, which I do really like the design of. Many parts of the Leo is lifted from the Tallgeese because, of course, the Tallgeese is the like super prototype for all mobile suits in the After Colony era. But the torso, legs, and arms are essentially identical to the Tallgeese. The head is different, but the Tallgeese actually does have like a Leo head underneath its own head. It just has like the cool visor and a head crest to cover up the Leo head. The skirts on the Leo are the part that's the most different because it lacks all of the extra thrusters and things that the Tallgeese had, but I think the Leo really does look like a mass-produced Tallgeese. It really does sell that idea, which I do like quite a bit. In terms of this color scheme, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I do like the classic green Leo design a lot more than this kind of blue design, but again, if you like the Southeast Asian Forces color scheme for the Leo, then you'll probably really like this kit because the color scheme is nearly identical to that one, I think. Again, it's kind of hard to tell with the differences in like color tones and the line art and things like that, but this is essentially the Southeast Asian Forces color scheme. And in terms of the like geometry and proportions of this kit, the flight pack, I'm not the biggest fan of. I went into this expecting to like it a lot more than the space pack, which is why I didn't pick up the space type. But actually seeing the kit in front of me, the flight type does look very awkward on the ground, as you would expect being the flight type. It definitely looks at home in the air, and I think on the ground it definitely looks a little bit odd, so I don't know how much of my slight apprehension to the flight pack on this thing is from it just being on the ground or from me just not being that big a fan of this design. I think the way the wing tips here are offset from the center unit is a little bit odd, and the propellant tanks are a little bit strange in terms of like how they actually look on this kit. But apart from that, I think it does its job of looking like a grunt suit with a flight pack mounted on it. I think it does do that aesthetic quite a bit of justice, and I think it's quite interesting if you were to only pick up one Leo. I don't know if this one would be it, but this is certainly an interesting addition to your collection if you like collecting grunt suits. So of course, for a quick size comparison, here is the high-grade Leo flight type next to a standard-sized high-grade, being the high-grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. Oh, okay. You can see here what I was talking about, the looseness in the legs. You can see it like kind of flopping around here. It is a little bit annoying to get this in a standard standing pose, given how back-heavy it is with the flight pack. So yeah, that's just demonstrating what I was talking about earlier. But for a size comparison, here is the Leo flight type next to a standard-sized high-grade, being the high-grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. So as you can see here, the Leo is going to be slightly shorter than your average high-grade, but the Leo flight type in particular will take up much more width on your shelf because of that large flight pack. So allocate the according amount of space on your shelf to accommodate the wideness of the flight pack. And in terms of depth-wise space, if you decide to equip it with the Dober gun, which you'll see in a moment, that also takes up quite a bit of more space than most like conventional like grunt suit weapons. So in terms of your accessories, here is the high-grade Leo flight type with everything it comes with. As you can see, this is a very complete accessory spread, and honestly, this is the main reason why I would see someone wanting to pick up either the Leo flight type or the Leo space type, is because of this wide suite of accessories. I think the actual like modifications to the Leo to enable them to fly or to enable them to operate in space is a little bit more uninteresting compared to the extra weapons and accessories you get. So of course, starting as usual with our hand options, being an incredibly basic grunt suit, the Leo only comes with the pair of high-grade holding hands you see on the kit right now. No other holding hands whatsoever. In terms of your melee options, you will get 2 beam sabers in an identical fashion to the Tallgeese, stored on the inside of the shield. The one part I forgot to mention in terms of the build is that the actual mounting points for the beam sabers here into the shield are, one, quite tight, so it is difficult to get the beam sabers out, and two, very fragile, so it's easy to break. So you may notice this beam saber here seems a little bit askew. That's because it is plastic cemented in place. I accidentally snapped the peg off of the shield, getting the beam saber out. So yeah, I can't use it unless I use a pin vise to drill a hole back into the beam saber, and at that point I can't mount it back onto the shield here without doing a little bit of modification. So you only see the Leo here wielding one beam saber in the posing section. Of course, the shield here is going to be identical to what was seen on the Tallgeese, being a very typical, like very, I guess, ancient warrior inspired round shield here that I think looks fairly distinct despite being so simple. I think the separation with the frame poking through these four holes looks quite nice. Unfortunately, though, there is no sub-arm like on the Tallgeese, so you can't like swing the shield out in front of it to look more practical as a defensive option. It's just going to sit on the shoulder here when you remove the shoulder armor. That's one part of the Leo flight type that is going to be like a common theme across the accessories, that you can swap the shoulder armors out for a number of different accessory options. And of course, to use with those beam sabers, you will have these two standard short style beam saber effect parts from Runner SB6. Not really much to say here. These are short beam saber effect parts. They do the job fine. In terms of these two parts here, so I did actually lose a part. So where the actual like booster units mount onto the Leo's thighs, you do get these two cap parts, or well, you get two cap parts. I lost one, so I only have one left, but I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world to lose one, given that, well, it's the Leo flight type. You're probably going to have it with the flight pack and the boosters on at all times, but if you want to have your Leo in just the Southeast Asian front like color variant, then you will use this like cap part over the holes in the thighs just to have your standard Leo legs. And of course, you will have this cap parts that goes in the back if you don't want to have the flight pack equipped again. If you just want to have the standard Southeast Asian Forces Leo, you will have this cap in on the back instead of the flight pack. For your ranged weapons then, which is where the accessories get a little bit interesting, first off, starting with the one that comes with your standard Leo, you will get the 105mm Leo rifle, which is a design that I like quite a bit. I do actually like it more than the Zaku machine gun. I don't know how sacrilegious it is to say that, but I just like how this design looks. You have a secondary handle here that can fold out when the Leo wants to grip onto it. You'll have to disassemble the hand and reassemble it around this bar, but I think the Leo looks really natural holding it two-handed. I think it looks really good, which is definitely how I'm probably going to end up posing it on the shelf at the end of the day, but this is a very nice looking rifle. Now for new accessories for the Leo flight type, of course, you will be getting this bazooka here, which does look quite nice. The handle is actually quite forward on the weapon, which I wasn't exactly expecting. And you will have this like secondary handle here mounted onto the scope unit. Again, all of this is just in one color, being an incredibly dark gray, almost black color, and you will need to paint in the scope to be color accurate. I used purple because I thought it would be a nicer accent color than the, I guess, pale-ish blue that the Leo comes in here. You will get this Dober gun, which is ostensibly identical to the one seen on the Tallgeese. Now, of course, there is no articulation in the handles. The magazine is not removable. This is a high grade. The weapon is essentially just two halves sandwiched together with a couple of extra parts for the adapter and the secondary handle here, which is going to be on a ball joint. It can flip down and it can rotate to either side. So you can use the Dober gun on either side and wield it two-handed no problem. And to facilitate that, you will have this adapter here that, again, you will remove the Leo shoulder armor and you will clip this bracket on to kind of reinforce the weapon and make the Leo actually able to hold this large weapon. So that will look pretty cool. Again, you will see that in the posing section. You can swap this adapter to either side depending on what shoulder you want it to mount to on the Leo. Unfortunately, again, unlike the Tallgeese, this does not have a sub arm or anything, so you can't get any like insanely dynamic pose with this, but you'll be seeing this in the posing section. And then you'll get a set of alternate shoulder armor to give the Leo extra heavy shoulder armor and these cannons on the top. These look a little bit small and dinky. I'm not the biggest fan of them, and I don't think they look that great when you use them as the primary weapon, but you'll see that, and I'll talk about it more in the posing section. And if you want to mount the shoulder armor in place of the standard shoulder armor, you will be using these two brackets to replace the shoulder armor. So again, you can replace the shoulder armor to display it with a number of different equipment options. So again, the Leo flight type does come flush with options for your accessories and the loadouts you would want to equip this with. So if you want to get like 2 or 3 of these and make a full squad of Leos, you definitely have plenty of variety to pose the Leos like with in terms of their arsenal. So getting into articulation now, starting as usual with the head. The Leo head is fixed in place. So there is a ball joint that the Leo head slots into, but given the way it sockets so deep into the torso here, there is literally no articulation you can do with the head. In terms of the torso then, there's a ball joint going from the center into the top and into the bottom, which allows for a pretty decent forward ab crunch, a moderate backwards ab crunch, which I'm not the biggest fan of because again, this heavy flight pack, you want as little backwards torso articulation as possible, and especially with how loose this torso is, like I mentioned earlier, it is a bit of an issue that the torso will accidentally flip backwards. You can, of course, 360 the torso in the center section. The bottom section will cap out at a 45-degree tilt to either side. You will get some fairly nice side to side tilt. Just be careful you don't pop the torso off of the polycap ball joint. In the shoulders then, for shoulder swing, you will get about a 45-degree swing forward. The shoulder armor can rotate independently, but because it's so minimal, it doesn't really get in the way of the side raises. Speaking of side raises, you can get the arm up about 90 degrees. You get full rotation in the upper bicep, although it is a bit tighter than a lot of other high grades. A single joint in the elbow will allow for a 135-degree bend, and the wrist is going to be on a ball joint, which will do ball joint things. In terms of the flight pack then, yeah, you can see what I was talking about with the torso being loose. It almost came off just now. In terms of the flight pack then, these wingtips are going to be on polycap ball joints, so you can swing them in and out, and you can rotate them up and down as you would want to make the Leo look more dynamic as it's flying. In addition, the actual flight pack itself is on a like kind of cylinder joint, very similar to some other like front skirts and things like that, so it can rotate up and down depending on like what angle you want the Leo to be flying in. If you want it to be like high speed charging forward, you can have it like tilted upwards a little bit to emphasize the speed of the Leo. Otherwise, you just have it flat horizontal like so. In the skirts then, your front skirts are going to be on separate ball joints, although there isn't that big a reason to articulate them given how small and minimal they are. The side skirts are also on separate ball joints, although again, with how out of the way they are, and it's kind of like, it forms this like weird like armor layered thing with the back skirt, so there's not really a reason to articulate them, and they're kind of difficult to articulate. And of course the back skirt is going to be fixed in place. In the hips then, there is a swivel mechanism, so you can pivot one leg forward and the other leg back. I don't know how well you can see that. It's not like super major, but it is there. In terms of your kicks then, you can get about a 90-degree front kick, about a 90-degree side kick, and about a 45-degree back kick. So far the Leo's articulation is exceptionally average, as you might expect. Yet, as you can see here, the polycap ball joint is very loose in the leg. It keeps popping out. You do get some rotation in the leg, although nothing too crazy. You get maybe 45 degrees to either side before the leg will want to pop out of the joint. The booster units in the legs don't articulate themselves, but you can take them out and rotate them to show the Leo if he needs a burst of extra speed, flying forward with the booster units rotated like so. A double joint in the knee will allow for a full 180-degree bend right there with some nice armor separation gimmicks, with the center of the knee remaining still while the top and bottom rotate. And unfortunately, though, the sides of the knees are hollow, so that is a little bit unsightly. You will want to patch that up with plot plate or something if it bothers you. The ankle armor can swivel around a little bit, but like I mentioned earlier, because of the design of it, it is a little bit like kind of stuck in one spot. It doesn't swivel around that much, and it is very loose, so I wouldn't want it to have any kind of range of motion in general. Of course, there is no heel-toe separation, so for your overall toe dips. Okay, so I'm learning now that the feet are also quite loose on the ball joints, which is a little bit annoying. It really just doesn't want to go back on. Okay, I'm leaving the ankle armor off the ball for now, just because it's really annoying to get back on. But for your toe dips, you can get it down fairly far. For toe raises, again, you also get a fairly nice toe raise. For side-to-side pivot, you do get a minor side-to-side pivot. And of course, you can 360 it about the peg, but when the ankle armor is on, you really can't. So when the ankle armor is on, yeah, well, I mean, you can 360 it, but it just pops the ankle armor off, which is a little bit annoying. So overall, the Leo articulation is decidedly average for most parts of this kit. Unfortunately, with parts like the head having no articulation and really no reason to articulate the waist armor whatsoever. So we'll see the articulation in action in some poses. So getting the high-grade Leo flight type into a running and gunning pose, here it is spinning around on the base, and this looks pretty horrible, as you might expect from the Leo flight type. You do want to have it in the air, so while I'm very surprised that it actually can balance with the very heavy flight pack on it in flight mode, I completely forgot until like after I finished recording all of the poses and stuff that the flight pack can actually fold down to be in standby mode, but I think that would make the balance a little bit better, putting the center of mass closer in line with the mobile suit itself rather than behind it, but I digress. It's very surprising that it can even hold this to begin with, although getting the back foot into position was a little bit awkward. The foot kept falling off from the looseness of the polycap going into it, like you saw in the articulation section. That was a bit annoying. But the Leo looks pretty horrible in this kind of pose for a couple of reasons. I think the base Leo would look alright, but still not great. Namely, because of the lack of articulation in the head, you cannot spin the head to actually look at what the Leo's firing, which makes this kind of pose look a lot more awkward and a lot more unbelievable as for something that the Leo would actually want to do. And for the flight pack itself, it just looks really awkward running around on the ground like this, like you might expect from it being the Leo flight type. It looks its best in the air. So yeah, for this specific version of the Leo, I would definitely not consider having it do this on the shelf, although I love the 105mm rifle for the Leo, and that is something I would consider posing and doing on the shelf just in the air, as you'll see in the conclusion section. So of course, getting the Leo crouched on the ground here, it is two-handing the bazooka, firing upwards at a target. So very similar to the running and gunning pose, this is not something I would consider having the Leo flight type doing, because that large flight pack looks really awkward when the Leo's crouched like this. For the base Leo, I think this is actually a really solid option for posing the Leo, especially as part of a squad. You can have the heavy weapons Leo on the ground firing the bazooka in the air while the other Leos go off and do their own thing. And the bazooka looks really good two-handed, especially with that splash of color that if you paint in the scope, it just looks really nice and contrasts very well with the dark tone of the bazooka itself. I love how the bazooka looks with the Leo. It's definitely the weapon of choice for this thing, and we'll talk about the Dober gun in a minute, but as far as a crouching pose with the bazooka, the Leo pulls it off better than a lot of other mobile suits do. That a lot of them do struggle to look natural in this kind of crouching pose with the torso very like whacking out of alignment. I'm very surprised the Leo could hold this fairly natural looking crouching pose even with the flight pack on it. That's very much a testament to how like min-maxed this kit is in terms of how simple it is, but how much it can actually do. So if you were to get, say, the Leo full weapon set, I might consider having like a base Leo in a pose like this, but for the flight type, not really playing to this kit's strengths. So getting the Leo into the air, then here I have it. Originally this was supposed to be it leaping backwards and firing the Dober gun downwards at a target, but in hindsight this looks more like the Leo is actually descending from the sky, which I think is a pretty interesting way to pose your like Leo flight type, and I do think it actually does look pretty good. Unfortunately, it looking good does not extend to the Dober gun, which I thought was going to be my favorite weapon for this kit going into this video, but now it really feels very awkward to like look at, and especially to like pose it using. Originally this was supposed to be a two-handed pose with the left hand gripping onto the secondary handle. Like the manual shows that you can do that, but in practice, it really doesn't work all that well unless you have the Leo firing the Dober gun off to its left, where the left hand is then much closer to the handle, but that looks really awkward. So effectively, the Dober gun is more of a one-handed option, and even in all of the promo photos for this kit, they only ever show the Leo flight type wielding the Dober gun one-handed. So I think as a one-handed, like over-the-shoulder weapon option, I don't think it's as cool as the bazooka or looks as good with the Leo flight type as the bazooka. I think the reinforcing bracket going on the shoulder really does sell the heft and power of the weapon, but I think just combined with the rest of the Leo and overall posing and things like that, I think it's a lot better off with the bazooka than the Dober gun. So as much as I normally love the Dober gun, as much as I love the design of the Tallgeese with the Dober gun, I don't think it's that great an option for the Leo. However, in the air, the Leo flight type, of course, does look fantastic. It looks incredibly natural. Any balance issues that it had kind of goes out the window, and it just becomes such a fun, posable kit that you can do so much with in the air. Although, most of what it looks really good at is going to be forward charging poses, as you'll see when I talk about it in the conclusion. So, Dober gun, not great with this kit, but this kind of like flying pose where it's like kind of descending from flight and landing with the weapon as standby does look pretty good, and I do think the shield looks pretty good in the arm, like kind of like this. And as a defensive option, it's not the greatest because of the lack of subarm limiting its articulation and ability to effectively cover the torso of the suit, but you'll see that right now. So getting it into a charging pose in midair, like with the beam saber in one hand and the shield in the other. So I was trying to get the shield out in front of the Leo's torso because, well, the flight pack is always going to be propelling the Leo forward. You can't really tilt it or anything. So I wanted to have the shield kind of front and center in front of the Leo to effectively protect it as it charges forward. Unfortunately, the lack of an arm and the inability to extend the shield out to the torso does make it look a little bit awkward in this kind of pose. And I don't think the melee option for the Leo flight type is its best anyway, given all of the interesting ordnance it's given in the form of its ranged weapons. I really think that this doesn't look all that great with the melee option, but I will leave it up while I talk about it in the conclusion, just because as a forward charging pose, the Leo flight type does look good, albeit not the best with this weapon. So in conclusion, the high-grade Leo flight type is a pretty solid grunt kit. It provides plenty of value for its price, being decidedly cheaper than your average high-grade, and including far more than the very bare bones Leo, building on the alright base of the Leo. In terms of the build, this is an exceptionally simple and quick build. You can bang it out in an afternoon. Even if you're not the fastest builder, you can definitely completely finish the build, panel lining and all, within a few hours. Everything is incredibly simple. The fine build system that Bandai pioneered with the Leo and extended onward through kits like the Maganek, the Death Army, and the Wyndham is on full display here, and despite how simple many of the joints are, the articulation animation that the build enables is actually quite surprising for how quick and minimal the actual build is, so it's very painless, very quick. The build is by far the most unimpressive part of this kit. In terms of aesthetics then, the Leo flight type does suffer from a number of color inaccuracies, although many of them are fairly minor and not really noticeable unless you pay very close attention to them, like the bar on the 105mm rifle and on the front of the torso, the center of section needing to be in dark gray. That's a detail that for most people it wouldn't really matter if you don't paint it in or anything like that. Really the only color correcting details that I would recommend you paint it, because it's incredibly noticeable and looks very off if you don't do it, is one, the scope of the bazooka. The rectangle in the center of the scope really should be in the same kind of, I guess, periwinkle color of the main armor tone of the Leo flight type here. I did mine in high new purple just because I thought it contrasted very well with the dark color of the bazooka, and that's an alright option. In addition, if you want to pose your Leo with the shoulder cannons, which I think don't actually look all that great in the flight type, I didn't really talk about it earlier, but you should be seeing it now. I think the added bulk they provide is a little bit antithetical to what the Leo flight type actually wants to do, which is be a very nimble, mobile, agile, airborne unit. Having these very bulky shoulders that limit your articulation with these cannons on them is not really all that great. In addition, the cannons themselves are very dinky and small and don't really look that great as the focus of any pose you're doing. So really that's something I would save for another Leo if you decide to make a squad of them. If you have like a ground Leo, I think it would look fine on that, or even like a space Leo, it might look alright, but on the flight type Leo, not the greatest. So aesthetics, just be prepared to do a little bit of small detail painting on the scope for the bazooka and on the intake and exhaust slash like thruster area of the flight pack on the back. The insides of that need to be in black just to show that they're hollow and stuff. I think if you don't do it, it looks really awkward, but once you paint it in, it does look quite nice. If you want to pose it with the shoulder cannons, make sure to paint the barrels in either dark gray or silver, depending on your preference. I did silver. I think it looks a lot better in silver, but again, don't really want to pose the shoulder cannons on the flight type Leo. In terms of accessories, this is where this kit really shines. It comes with a full suite of accessories that mostly look fantastic. The Leo flight type comes equipped with so many weapons that you can have a full squad of them, all of them with different loadouts. And I think that's where this kit really shines as an army builder. It gives you so much choice if you decide to get multiple of them to have a fully distinct squad, each of them with their own purposes within it. And all of the weapons are simple but effective for the most part. I think the Dober gun looks a little bit awkward with the Leo, the flight type, but I think it could look good with some of the other Leos out there. But as far as the arsenal goes, the 105mm rifle looks fantastic. The shield is quite nice, although not the greatest for actual defensive posing, just kind of auxiliary on the arm, enhancing other poses. It's alright. The bazooka is definitely the star of the show here and looks the best with the Leo. The beam sabers are beam sabers, not much to say about them. The Dober gun looks good, but I don't think it looks that great with the Leo flight type in particular. And the shoulder cannons, like I said earlier, a little bit awkward on the flight type Leo, but could look very good on like a standard Leo if you repainted it to match the colors, of course. But the accessory spread is very complete, and the only things I would really say are missing are extra hand options, but with how basic of a high-grade kit this is, I don't really blame it for missing out on those hand options. In terms of articulation then, the Leo is decidedly very average to mediocre. As you might expect from a very basic grunt kit, it's not doing anything groundbreaking or crazy with its articulation. It can pull off many of the poses you would want it to, but unfortunately the aforementioned fit issues that this kit has with some parts on the polycaps and especially the ankle armor, once the foot falls off, the ankle armor is probably also going to go too. It does limit the kind of poses you can do with the lower body. In addition, your posing options are limited a bit by the inability to articulate the head to actually look in any direction that it wants to be firing in, which does make certain poses, like the running gunning pose you saw at the beginning, or any kind of melee pose, look a little bit awkward. It's definitely at its best, in melee at least, in a preparing pose, but when the Leo works, it really works. When it's flying forward, charging with the 105mm rifle, like you should be seeing now, it does look really great in a way that many other grunt suits simply don't. The 105mm rifle is a fantastic weapon, and I love how it looks with the Leo flight type, just charging forward in the air. In this kind of basic pose is where the Leo flight type really does shine. You don't need to do anything crazy with it, and it probably wouldn't look that great even if it could pull off anything insane. It is a basic grunt kit, and therefore does look best when it's doing basic grunt things. So would I recommend this kit? Yes. I think the amount of value this provides over the standard Leo for the price tag, although granted I do think it got jacked up a few more dollars on P-Bandai since I bought my kit because of tariff uncertainty and all that. Bandai seems to be jacking up their prices this year, which is very unfortunate. A lot of kits on P-Bandai have just gone up 25 to 30% in price, and that just kind of sucks. But even for like $21 or $22, I still think this kit is a decent value for the price, and all of the options it gives you can also distribute to other grunt kits and things like that. A lot of its options do look very good on other kits, so if just for the value alone, I would absolutely recommend this kit. If you were to only get one Leo, however, I would probably recommend the Leo full weapon set over this, just because of the extra value that all of its options provides, but this kit is certainly a valuable addition to any After Colony collection. So that was my review of the high-grade Leo flight type. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub and hit notification bell so you don't miss future reviews. If you like this video, give it a like, and I will see you next time with my review of the Master Grade Gundam Amazing Red Warrior. I'll see you then.